we're trying to get to that where the whole economy has reached that balance in terms of the emissions that are released with the emissions that can be naturally absorbed within that environment, and therefore we're not adding to that sort of the backlog of carbon in our atmosphere, which is then causing the warming. And just to be clear, when we talk about kind of achieving net zero, that gives us the greatest probability, they believe, science-based, as Alex says, of limiting the degrees of warming of the Earth's atmosphere. We're still baking in, even if we get to that goal, 1.5 degrees, and that still has quite profound physical impact. So as Alex rightly says, that Paris alignment is also about that physical adaptation and making sure that's sort of covered as well. But from a net zero, from a sort of investor in a sort of more practical sense, there's a sort of a consensus that we need to be kind of reducing and massively decarbonising our portfolios, but decarbonise them in a real economy way. It's not about just, tell you what, I'll swap out a few oil and gas companies and replace them with tech companies. I would have decarbonised my portfolio but achieved absolutely nothing. So it has to be the real world. And I think we'll touch on this, and so, as we dig deeper into this, is how do we actually get those real economy changes to happen. So we talk about things like emissions reductions by 2030 of it's like 50% from where we started. A lot of investors I'm talking to are using kind of their 2019 kind of carbon benchmark as their kind of their starting point, because a lot of us are having to create some of these metrics quite recently. So we're talking about that 50% emissions intensity reduction or absolute reductions by 2030. We talk about sort of 7.6% per annum kind of reductions. That's a sort of a lot of the evidence coming out that's a sort of a target to start with. I think it's inevitable that some of these things won't be totally correct, but that's what we need to kind of continue to review on this journey. But that assumption is on that low or no overshoot kind of scenario. So what is that is baking in kind of where we need to get to. So we need to deliver that through really getting these companies in which we invest to change in terms of their capital allocations, in terms of their operating emissions, everything about it, how they're doing their value chain. So what we do need to recognise is the fact that net zero for what an investor who's investing in the whole economy versus perhaps the electricity sector. So the IEA was quite clear that we need to decarbonise the electricity sector by 2040. So net zero in electricity is 2040, not 2050. So there are different pathways and different kind of targets depending on where you are within that sort of sectoral horizon. But from an investor's perspective, I'd say probably start with kind of the work coming out from the ITCC on the net zero investor framework, because those are they are very much science-based, and that gives you kind of that practical toolkit as to kind of what can I actually do tomorrow that will actually get me to that real world decarbonisation.